something is happening to us. We are moving faster, working harder, automating everything, but somewhere in the rush, we're losing the one thing that makes us extraordinary, our humanity. And the danger isn't that machines will replace us. Is that we will start acting like them. Every team, every relationship, every courageous idea that ever changed the world began with a human moment, a conversation, a feeling, a connection. When we forget that, we break trust, we create distance, we weaken the very foundation that allows us to lead, to inspire, and to build anything that lasts. So today is a call, a reminder, an alarm bell. If we want loyalty, if we want innovation, if we want stronger teams and stronger families, we must keep it human, because the future belongs to those who protect what makes us uniquely us. BR machines can process information, but only humans can connect. And this truth becomes even more profound when we look at the psychology of men. Men are often taught from an early age to be logical, efficient, controlled. They're encouraged to value outcomes over emotions, clarity over vulnerability, and strength over openness. And while those traits can be powerful, they can also create a quiet internal war, the pressure to operate like a machine while longing to be understood like a human. When men are told to shut down, shut up, or figure it out, they don't become stronger. They become disconnected. And disconnection is the doorway to loneliness, frustration, and silent suffering. Women, on the other hand, often see what men try so hard to hide. They notice the micro expressions, the pauses, the tension in the shoulders, the heaviness in the silence. Women frequently understand men not because men communicate clearly, but because women have been conditioned to listen between the lines. Yet even with this intuitive awareness, they can't reach a man who believes connection is a threat to his identity. When a man starts behaving like a machine, predictable, guarded, unexpressive, his partner is left trying to fill in emotional blanks that only he can answer. That's where misunderstandings grow. Not because love is missing, but because connection is. Men often think their value comes from performance, so they show strength by fixing problems and hiding weaknesses. But the people who care about them aren't asking for a perfect man, they're asking for an honest one. Acknowledging fear, confusion, or stress isn't a sign of failure, it's a sign that a man is choosing to be human instead of pretending to be indestructible. And ironically, nothing earns more respect, especially from women, than a man who is brave enough to show what's real. In workplaces, the pattern repeats. Men who lead like machines focus on results, directives, and efficiency. They measure, optimize, and push. They expect themselves and others to operate without friction, without fatigue, without feeling. But people don't follow instructions, they follow humans. A man who connects, who listens, who empathizes becomes magnetic. His presence gives others permission to show up fully. His humanity creates loyalty that no amount of pressure can force. The truth is, men crave connection just as much as women, sometimes even more, but they've been taught to earn it rather than experience it. They try to prove their worth instead of believing they have worth. And when connection becomes something they must deserve, they slowly shut down emotionally, becoming distant in relationships and rigid in leadership. The tragedy is not that men don't feel, it's that many believe they're not allowed to. Connection requires something no machine can ever do: risk. It demands that a man step into uncertainty, into the discomfort of being seen, into the vulnerability of being known. And while it may feel dangerous, it's the very ingredient that makes relationships stronger, teams more united, and a man's own sense of purpose deeper and more grounded. Speed is one of the greatest threats to empathy, and nowhere is this more visible than in the psychology of men who feel the constant pressure to move fast, fix fast, decide fast, and succeed fast. Men often grow up believing that slowing down is weakness, hesitation, or a lack of competence. They internalize the idea that their value comes from how quickly they can solve problems or deliver results. But in the rush to respond, to achieve, to prove themselves, they overlook the emotional world unfolding right in front of them. And when a man moves too fast, he stops noticing the subtle cues, the human signals, the needs that aren't spoken but deeply felt. Women feel the impact of this speed more acutely because they are often more attuned to emotional detail. When a man rushes through conversations or decisions, a woman doesn't just see urgency, she feels distance. She senses when he's present but not available, when he's hearing but not listening, when he's responding but not understanding. The problem isn't that he doesn't care, it's that his pace doesn't allow empathy the time it needs to breathe. Empathy is slow. It requires stillness, awareness, and the space to interpret what is happening beneath the surface. And when speed takes over, connection becomes the first casualty. Men in leadership roles face the same internal tug of war. They believe that authority means decisiveness and that urgency shows strength. They interpret pressure as a signal to accelerate rather than reflect. But people don't want leaders who move fast. They want leaders who notice. The team member who seems off today, the colleague whose silence is unusual, the employee whose performance dip is a plea rather than a problem. These moments are invisible at high speed. A man who slows down long enough to observe, to check in, to ask, "Are you okay?" demonstrates a kind of leadership that no rush can ever replicate. The deeper truth is that men often use speed as armor. Moving quickly keeps them from confronting their own discomfort, uncertainty, or emotional vulnerability. If they stay busy enough, they don't have to feel. If they move fast enough, they don't have to think. And if they keep pushing hard enough, they can avoid the deeper conversations with themselves and others that might expose their fears. But the very thing they run from is the thing that would make their relationships, their teams, and their sense of purpose stronger. Women, observing this, may interpret speed as indifference. They may assume he doesn't care, doesn't prioritize them, or doesn't value emotional connection. But often he simply hasn't been taught how to slow down without feeling like he's falling behind. He needs reassurance that pausing is not failure, it's wisdom. It's in those slower moments that he can access empathy, respond with intention rather than instinct, and show up in a way that the people around him can actually feel. Slowing down is not about doing less. It's about allowing more humanity to come through. It's the shift from reacting to understanding, from efficiency to presence, from output to connection. And when a man embraces that rhythm, everything around him, his relationships, his leadership, his influence, begins to change. Trust isn't built through performance, it's built through moments. And this truth carries a unique weight for men who are taught to quantify their worth. Men often evaluate themselves through metrics: how much they earn, how much they provide, how much they accomplish. They measure success the way a machine measures output, believing numbers can replace presence. But trust doesn't grow in the big milestones or the impressive results. It grows in the quiet interactions, the small gestures, the moments when someone feels seen rather than assessed. And when a man relies too heavily on metrics, he unintentionally creates emotional distance where connection was meant to grow. Women experience this disconnect in a different way because they feel trust emotionally, not numerically. They notice the consistency of attention, the tone of a reply, the reliability of presence. A woman doesn't trust a man because he achieves. She trusts him because he shows up in the difficult conversations, in the uncomfortable truths, in the vulnerable exchanges that can't be counted on a scoreboard. When a man tries to earn trust through success rather than sincerity, the relationship becomes transactional instead of intimate. She may appreciate what he does, but she won't feel safe with who he is. Men often misunderstand trust as something to be proven rather than something to be lived. They bring the same mindset they use at work into their relationships, believing that if they hit targets, being on time, paying bills, fulfilling responsibilities, trust should naturally follow. And while those things matter, they are not the foundation. The foundation comes from moments of empathy, the courage to be honest, the ability to say, "I'm struggling," or "I don't know," or "I need you." For many men, these moments feel dangerous because they challenge the belief that strength is defined by self-sufficiency. But true trust is built when a man allows someone to see beyond his competence. In leadership, this pattern becomes even more apparent. Men who rely solely on metrics believe trust comes from performance evaluations, KPIs, and achievements. They assume people will follow them because they are effective or because they deliver results. But teams don't commit because of a spreadsheet. They commit because of how a leader makes them feel. The moment a man remembers someone's child's name, asks about their well-being, admits a mistake, or stands up for them when no one else does, those are the moments where trust takes root. It's not the quarterly report that builds loyalty, it's the daily humanity. Women observing male leaders often see how much pressure men carry to appear unshakable. They can feel the internal struggle between wanting to be relatable and fearing it might undermine authority. What women respond to most is not flawless strength, but trustworthy presence. When a man reveals even a fraction of vulnerability, he becomes more accessible, more believable, more real. And in both romantic and professional relationships, real is where trust begins. Trust grows slowly and subtly, often in the exact places men are taught to overlook. It's built in the pause before reacting, the willingness to listen, the consistency in small behaviors, and the authenticity that can't be quantified but can absolutely be felt. Perfection is the lie men are taught to chase, and presence is the truth the people around them actually need. Men grow up believing that their value comes from getting everything right, being the strongest, the most capable, the most reliable. They feel pressured to fix every problem, answer every question, and hold everything together without showing strain. But while they're busy trying to be flawless, the people who love them aren't asking for flawlessness. They're asking for attention, for engagement, for emotional availability. They want the man, not the machine. Women feel this gap intensely because they don't bond through perfection, they bond through connection. A woman doesn't trust a man more when he pretends to be invincible. She trusts him more when he's genuinely present with her, when he listens without rushing, when he responds without defensiveness, when he shares without calculating. Presence is what tells her, you matter. Your voice matters. This moment matters. Perfection, on the other hand, pushes her away because it creates a wall she can't reach through. A man trying to be perfect feels distant, untouchable, and emotionally unavailable, even when he's physically right there. Men often mistake presence for passivity, as if slowing down to engage means losing control or appearing weak. They fear that if they stop performing, people will see the cracks they've been hiding. But presence isn't about doing less. It's about being more aware, more grounded, more human. It's the courage to look someone in the eyes instead of looking at the next task. It's the willingness to be fully in the moment, even when the moment is uncomfortable. And ironically, the more present a man is, the more respect he earns, not because he's perfect, but because he's real. In leadership, this dynamic becomes even sharper. Men in leadership roles often feel obligated to project certainty and mastery at all times. They worry that if they show hesitation or vulnerability, their team will lose confidence in them. But teams don't follow men who pretend to be perfect. They follow men who show up consistently. They follow leaders who listen deeply, who make time for people, who notice when someone is struggling. A leader who is present builds loyalty and trust in ways perfection never can. Presence makes people feel safe, seen, and valued, and those feelings are what ignite commitment. Women observing male leaders often recognize the burden men carry to appear flawless. They can sense when a man is performing strength rather than embodying it. What resonates with them, and with everyone, is the leader who pauses long enough to connect, who asks meaningful questions, who admits when he doesn't have all the answers. Presence communicates humility, approachability, and confidence without arrogance. It creates an environment where people feel free to express themselves rather than hide behind their own masks of perfection. The deepest irony is that men often pursue perfection, thinking it will bring them admiration, success, or love. But admiration comes from authenticity, success from connection, and love from presence. When a man stops trying to impress and starts choosing to be present, everything around him becomes more honest, more open, and more alive. Courage doesn't begin with strength, it begins with vulnerability, and this truth challenges the very foundation of how men are raised to see themselves. Men are taught to hide their fears, suppress their doubts, and armor their emotions with toughness. They're conditioned to believe that courage looks like fearlessness, when in reality, courage is impossible without fear. Vulnerability is the doorway through which courage enters, yet it's the one doorway men are repeatedly told to avoid. And the cost of avoiding it isn't just emotional. It's relational, psychological, and deeply human. Women see this struggle even when men think they're hiding it. They notice when a man withdraws instead of opening up, when he turns silence into a shield, when he masks emotional fatigue with work or distraction. A woman doesn't interpret vulnerability as weakness. She interprets it as honesty. When a man admits he's scared, uncertain, overwhelmed, or confused, she doesn't lose respect for him. She gains trust in him. His vulnerability gives her permission to share her own, creating a connection that perfection could never build. What she fears most is not a man who is vulnerable, but a man who refuses to be. Men often confuse vulnerability with exposure, as if showing emotion automatically puts them in danger. They fear being judged, misunderstood, or seen as less capable. But vulnerability is not about collapsing, it's about revealing the truth behind the armor. It's the moment a man says, "I don't have it all figured out," or "I need help," or "I'm carrying more than I can handle." These moments break the impossible standard of invincibility and replace it with genuine human courage. And the surprising thing is, the moment a man lets vulnerability show, the people around him don't step back, they step closer. In leadership, vulnerability becomes even more powerful. Men in leadership roles often feel pressure to project certainty and control, believing that any sign of uncertainty will weaken their authority. But the teams they lead aren't looking for perfect leaders, they're looking for human ones. A leader who acknowledges a mistake, asks for input, or admits he's learning earns far more loyalty than a leader who pretends to have all the answers. Vulnerability creates psychological safety, the sense that it's okay to speak up, to question, to try and fail. When a man leads with vulnerability, he unlocks courage in the people around him. Women in work environments often sense the emotional weight men carry behind their professional roles. They can tell when a man is under pressure but pretending not to be, or when he's pushing himself to the edge to maintain an image of resilience. What impresses them and others is the man who says, "I'm struggling, but I'm here," or "let's figure this out together." That kind of honesty doesn't diminish leadership, it strengthens it. It makes the environment more collaborative, more supportive, and more human. The deeper truth is that vulnerability is the birthplace of strength, connection, and authentic masculinity. A man who refuses vulnerability becomes rigid, distant, and emotionally unreachable. But a man who embraces vulnerability becomes courageous, relatable, and deeply trusted. Vulnerability is not the opposite of courage, it is the source of it. It's the moment when a man stops performing and starts being, when he stops hiding and starts leading, when he stops fearing judgment and starts embracing the truth that being human is not a flaw, but the foundation of every meaningful relationship he will ever build. Humanity isn't a skill a man learns, it's a responsibility he carries. And this truth cuts through the unrealistic expectations placed on men from the moment they are old enough to understand what the world expects of them. Men are taught to be capable, logical, resilient, and efficient, but they are rarely taught to be emotionally available or deeply human. They learn how to achieve, how to compete, how to endure, but not how to connect. And yet, it is their humanity, not their competence, that shapes the quality of their relationships, their leadership, and their impact on the people who depend on them. Women feel this imbalance every day, especially in their closest relationships. When a man leads with his humanity, she feels safe, understood, and valued. But when he hides behind stoicism, toughness, or constant problem solving, she feels shut out from the one part of him she wants most, his heart. A woman doesn't want a man who performs emotional strength. She wants a man who takes responsibility for his emotional presence. His humanity is what allows her to relax, communicate openly, and trust him deeply. When he withholds it, even unintentionally, the relationship becomes a guessing game she never wanted to play. Men often underestimate how deeply their humanity influences their ability to lead and love. They assume that their role is to provide answers, solutions, and stability, but the people around them don't want a perfect protector. They want a present partner. It's not the grand gestures that build connection. It's the small moments where a man chooses to show up emotionally instead of retreating. When he shares instead of shutting down, listens instead of reacting, and reveals instead of concealing, he fulfills a responsibility far greater than any task he could complete. He becomes someone people can rely on, not just for strength, but for understanding. In professional settings, this responsibility becomes even more significant. Men who rely solely on logic and execution often overlook the human experience of the people they lead. They focus on deadlines, deliverables, and performance metrics, believing that results alone define success. But the people on their teams don't connect to results. They connect to the leader behind them, a man who takes responsibility for his humanity, creates an environment where people feel valued, seen, and supported. He notices the stressed colleague, the quiet employee, the person who is struggling silently. His humanity becomes a source of stability because it communicates something no skill ever could. You matter. Women in workplaces often sense the emotional disconnect men struggle with. They can tell when he's pushing through stress, avoiding vulnerability, or hiding exhaustion behind professionalism. They see the cost of a man living as if humanity is optional. And what they respect most is not the man who hides his struggles, but the man who acknowledges them responsibly. When a man says, "I need a moment," or "I could use help," he doesn't lose authority, he gains authenticity. His humanity becomes reassurance, not risk. The deeper truth is that humanity is not something a man turns on when it's convenient. It's a responsibility he carries in every interaction, every relationship, every leadership moment. It's the responsibility to treat people with compassion instead of judgment, to respond with patience instead of frustration, and to communicate with honesty instead of emotional distance. Humanity is choosing connection over control, empathy over efficiency, presence over perfection. It's choosing to show up as a whole person rather than a role. Men who embrace this responsibility discover something profound. Humanity isn't a burden to carry. It's the greatest influence they possess. It allows them to love more deeply, lead more effectively, and live more authentically. And the more responsibility they take for their humanity, the more the people around them feel empowered to embrace their own.